All right, dive buddies, ready to plunge into some serious scuba safety. Today's deep dive is all about making sure your next underwater adventure is as safe as it is awe-inspiring. We're talking essential know-how for handling anything the deep throws your way.
Because let's face it, while we all dream of serene roofs and playful marine life, the underwater world demands respect, preparation, and a healthy dose of caution.
Exactly. You shared some material with us about your upcoming scuba trip. I'm seeing articles here about pre-dive checks, handling emergencies, even the dangers of that celebratory post-dive beer. You're really thinking this through.
Well, I believe in being prepared. Knowledge, after all, is the best life preserver you can pack.
Love that. And speaking of preparation, let's talk about that crucial pre-dive buddy check. It's more than just making sure your buddy remember their fins, right?
Absolutely. That pre-dive check, often remembered by divers using the acronym BWRAF, buoyancy, weights, releases, air, final OK, is non-negotiable for a reason. It's like a mini systems check before you launch into the deep.
Okay, so BWRAF, it's an easy one to remember. But, sometimes those routine checks can feel a little, well, routine. Why is each element on that checklist so critical?
Well, imagine this. You're descending, the reef is coming into view, and suddenly you realize your buoyancy compensator isn't working as it should. You're struggling to control your depth, potentially risking a rapid ascent, a recipe for disaster. Or what if your air gauge malfunctions and you don't realize you're low on air until it's almost too late?
Wow, okay, you've definitely captured my attention. It's more than just ticking boxes. It's about ensuring your life support system is entirely good to go.
Precisely. And perhaps even more importantly, the buddy check is about communication. It's about establishing clear signals and understanding with your dive partner before you descend. Remember down there, your buddy is your lifeline.
It's that shared understanding, that confidence in each other's preparedness that can make all the difference if things go unexpected. Speaking of unexpected, let's talk about some common dive emergencies. One that always makes my heart skip a beat, even just reading about it, is running out of air. Okay, deep breaths, everyone. It's more common than we might think, and knowing what to do is crucial. So let's play this out. You're down there enjoying the view, and suddenly you're low on air. What's the immediate next step?
Signal your buddy and signal decisively. This isn't a time for subtle hints. Every diver knows that signal means I need air now.
Right, no time for playing charades at 30 meters. Now, in a perfect world, your buddy is right there and can immediately share their alternate air source, that handy octopus regulator. But for whatever reason, let's say you find yourself alone and can't reach your buddy. What then?
That's when your training kicks in, specifically a little something called Controlled Emergency Swimming Ascent, or CESA for short.
Okay. It sounds a lot more controlled and way less terrifying than a panic bolt for the surface, which is what I imagine my instinct would be. So talk us through CESA. What's the technique?
It's all about controlled exhalation as you ascend. You're swimming up slowly and continuously breathing out. This might seem counterintuitive, but remember, as you ascend, the water pressure decreases and the air trapped in your lungs will expand. Controlled exhalation prevents that expanding air from causing serious injury.
That's a great point about the physics of it all. It's easy to forget that water pressure changes everything. Okay, another scenario that might make even experienced divers a tad uneasy entanglement. It's like the underwater version of that nightmare where you're trying to run, but you're stuck in slow motion. What's the worst thing you could do if you find yourself tangled in something down there?
You're right, it's a common fear, and the instinct is often to thrash around wildly trying to break free. But as you can imagine, that often exacerbates the situation. You risk tangling yourself further, using up precious air, and potentially even harming yourself or delicate marine life.
So resisting that primal urge to thrash is key. What should we do instead?
The moment you realize you're entangled, signal your buddy. They can assess the situation calmly and help you get untangled. If you're alone, the name of the game is to stay calm and work through the entanglement slowly and methodically.
Breathe, assess, and address. Got it. It's a great reminder that panic is rarely helpful, especially underwater. Now, you know that feeling when you've been hanging out at the surface a little too long, chatting with your dive buddies, and you start to feel a little off? Like, maybe you shouldn't be making any major decisions right now. Well, imagine that feeling amplified at depth. That, my friends, is nitrogen narcosis, sometimes called rapture of the deep.
A very poetic name for a potentially serious condition. Nitrogen narcosis is all about the effects of nitrogen under pressure. As you go deeper, your body absorbs more nitrogen, and for some divers, this can create a sort of narcotic effect on the brain.
So we're talking about actually getting impaired at depth, like having one too many cocktails, but without the fun party atmosphere. What's the science behind this?
Exactly. At depth, nitrogen, which is inert at sea level, starts to affect the transmission of signals in our nervous system. This can lead to impaired judgment, a false sense of euphoria, even hallucinations. It's why divers need to be aware of their depth limits and recognize the symptoms, both in themselves and their buddies.
Okay, so what should we be looking out for? How do we know if we, or our dive buddy, are experiencing nitrogen narcosis?
The symptoms can be subtle at first. You might feel overly confident, a little lightheaded, or even giddy. Some divers describe it as feeling fuzzy or like they're in a dream. You might find it hard to concentrate or make rational decisions.
And that's a problem when you're relying on your judgment to stay safe in an environment where you literally can't just run outside for a breath of fresh air. What should you do if you suspect nitrogen narcosis is setting in?
The most important thing is to ascend to a shallower depth. As the pressure decreases, the nitrogen in your system will start to dissipate, and the symptoms will usually subside quickly. Prevention, of course, is key as well. Know your limits, don't dive beyond your training and experience level, and if you start to feel any effects at all, even if you're not sure, play it safe and ascend.
Prevention and proactive action. Excellent advice. Okay, let's switch gears now to a topic that can feel a bit more serious, even a little mysterious decompression sickness, or the bends, as it's often called. It's one of those things we hear about as divers, but hope to never experience firsthand.
It is a serious condition, but understanding the science behind it can demystify it a bit and help us understand how to prevent it. It all goes back to those pressure changes we were talking about earlier.
Okay, so walk us through it. What's happening in the body when someone experiences the bends?
Essentially, when we breathe underwater, our bodies are experiencing increased pressure, which causes nitrogen from the air we breathe to dissolve into our body tissues. Think of it like that shaken-up soda bottle analogy ascends too quickly, and that nitrogen comes out of solution too fast, forming bubbles in our tissues and bloodstream. Those bubbles are what lead to the symptoms of decompression sickness.
So it's all about managing that transition from high pressure to low pressure as we ascend. That's why a slow, controlled ascent is so crucial.
Precisely. It gives our bodies time to release that excess nitrogen gradually and safely through our lungs, avoiding those bubbles. And this is why, as much as we might enjoy a celebratory drink after a dive, that post-dive beer can actually be detrimental.
Wait, really? I always heard that one before, but to be honest, it's one of those things that always seems a little overly cautious to me. Is it really that big of a deal? What's the connection between that cold beer and decompression sickness?
Well, think about it. Alcohol dehydrates you, and dehydration can actually increase the risk of DCS because it makes it harder for your body to eliminate that excess nitrogen efficiently. Plus, let's be honest, alcohol can also impair our judgment, making us less likely to recognize the early symptoms of DCS, which, as you can imagine, is crucial for early intervention.
Okay, point taken, celebratory drinks can wait until we're safely back on dry land. So we've talked about the physical aspects of diving safety, but there's another layer we should dive into: the mental game of scuba. It's easy to underestimate how intense things can get down there, even on a seemingly ordinary dive.
You're absolutely right. Our mental state underwater is just as important as our physical skills and equipment. Panic is a natural human response to stress, but in the underwater world, it can have serious consequences.
So what happens when panic sets in underwater? Why is it so crucial to get a grip on our minds down there?
Think about it. When we panic, our breathing becomes rapid and shallow, which depletes our air supply much faster. We might start making irrational decisions, like trying to bolt for the surface, which we've already discussed can be incredibly dangerous. Our ability to think clearly and respond appropriately goes right out the window.
Right, it's like our survival instincts kick in, but instead of helping us, they actually lead us to make choices that could put us in more danger. So how do we train our brains to stay calm when things feel like they're spiraling?
One incredibly effective technique is the stop, breathe, think, act method. It sounds almost deceptively simple, but it's amazing how powerful it can be in a stressful situation.
I've heard of this one. It's all about pausing and taking a moment to assess the situation before reacting, right?
Exactly. The moment you feel that surge of panic, the first step is to literally stop what you're doing, even if it's just for a few seconds, and focus on your breathing. Take a few slow, deep breaths, which helps calm your nervous system, slows down that racing heartbeat, and gives your brain a chance to catch up. Once you've regained some composure, you can start to think clearly about the situation and how to respond appropriately.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Interrupt the panic, restore calm, then address the problem. It's something I try to remind myself of, even in everyday life. Speaking of keeping a cool head, Let's talk about another scenario that can really test a diver's composure getting separated from your buddy. Just the thought of it is enough to make your heart race a bit.
Absolutely. It's a situation every diver wants to avoid, but as with any potential emergency, knowing what to do if it happens can be a lifesaver.
So imagine this. You're happily exploring a reef, mesmerized by the marine life, and you look up. Your buddy is gone. What's step one?
As we've discussed, the most important thing is not to panic. Easier said than done, right? But remember that stop, breathe, think, act method. Take those deep breaths and remind yourself that you've got this. Then it's time to initiate the lost buddy procedure.
Okay, so there's an actual procedure for this.
Most dive organizations recommend a standardized approach. It starts with a quick but thorough search of the immediate area. You're not just swimming around in a frenzy, though. You're looking around methodically, turning slowly in a full circle, ascending slightly, looking both up and down for about a minute.
A controlled search pattern. Got it. What happens if, after that initial minute, your buddy is still nowhere to be found?
That's where that pre-dive planning we talked about earlier becomes absolutely crucial. Before you even get in the water, you and your buddy should have agreed on a designated meeting point, usually somewhere easy to spot on the dive site, or a plan for ascending safely if you get separated and can't find each other.
It's that old adage. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. So much of diving safety comes back to preparation and communication. Okay, before we surface from this deep dive into scuba safety, I want to touch on a few essential pieces of emergency equipment. One that you specifically mentioned in your notes is the SMB, the surface marker buoy. For those who might be new to diving, can you explain what an SMB is and why it's so vital?
Absolutely. You know how sometimes you see those bright inflatable tubes popping up on the surface of the water? Those are SMBs, and they're basically like sending up a flare to signal your location to the surface.
It's your way of saying, hey, I'm down here, without having to shout underwater. When would you deploy an SMB?
They're crucial in emergencies if you need to signal for help, if you've surfaced away from the boat, or even if you've had a change of plans underwater and need to alert the boat to your new location.
It's like having your own personal beacon. Smart. And then there are those trusty cutting tools that we always hear about. I'm picturing a dive knife here, but I'm guessing there are other options as well.
You got it. We talked about entanglement earlier, and having a sharp knife or a pair of dive shears readily accessible can be the difference between a minor inconvenience and a potentially life-threatening situation.
They're like the better to have it and not need it tool of the scuba world. And that brings up a crucial point about all emergency equipment, really knowing how to use it before an emergency arises. You don't want to be fumbling around with unfamiliar gear when the pressure is on, literally. We've covered a lot of ground today, from those essential pre-dive checks to handling everything from out-of-air situations to the nuances of decompression sickness. As we prepare to ascend from this deep dive into scuba safety, what's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to resurface with today?
Safety is not about memorizing a bunch of rules. It's about cultivating a mindset of preparedness and continuous learning. It's about understanding the why behind the what, and appreciating that the more you know, the more you'll enjoy those incredible underwater adventures.
I love that knowledge empowers us to explore the underwater world safely and confidently. It's about appreciating the privilege of diving and doing everything we can to make sure every dive is a safe and memorable one. Dive safe, everyone.